This is Christian historian Dr. Gary Habermas. He's appearing with Cameron Bertuzzi of Capturing Christianity to explain to us all how Jesus is the real thing. I'm expecting a lot of equivocation and goalpost shifting in this one, but it should be interesting. We're going to get right to it, but first, if you're new here, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot, and you'll get more content like this. Thank you. And also, super thanks to those who hit super thanks in some recent videos. Aubrey Leone and Lock Him Up. May Nil bless you with the powers of 1,000 made-up gods. Now with that said, let's do this thing.
So what is, in your mind, the fastest way to disarm a mythicist?
I've got a book called Historical Jesus where I list 12.5 texts, many of them outside the New Testament, in the ancient world for the existence of Jesus. But one probably better example I would use.
First of all, for those of you who may not be aware, a mythicist is a person who believes that Jesus was probably a myth. There's some evidence for that. There's a pretty strong case to be made. You can check out a taste of that in a recent interview with a godless engineer. Now, the alternative that Christian scholars like Dr. Habermas tend to subscribe to is that Jesus probably existed. The miracles are something else entirely, and we will get to those, but I just wanted to clear up, for those of you who may not know, what the heck mythicism is. Now, as to Dr. Habermas's first point, he talks about 12 sources.
Many of them outside the New Testament.
So we're already on relatively rocky footing. He's counting every book in the New Testament as a separate source. It's dishonest, especially considering that we know how much plagiarism took place between the various books of the New Testament.
So say, yeah, but you're a Christian. Okay, Bart Ehrman, an atheist New Testament scholar. Bart Ehrman gives 15 independent sources.
Gotta stop him again. Okay, first of all, I find it hilarious. He has to turn to Bart Ehrman because his historical science isn't sufficient to the task, so he has to present an unbiased viewpoint. This is exactly what Christopher Hitchens was always talking about, that Christian science has to borrow from the secular world in order to get anywhere. Here's Gary Habermas literally reaching into Bart Ehrman's CV in order to pull out information. Second, he's equivocating on the word independent sources. These 15 sources, once again, are mostly copies of each other. If you count the sources that are not part of the New Testament, the number drops low enough to count on one hand usually. And most of those, such as the ones from Josephus, aren't reporting on Jesus being real. They're reporting there's a group of people who say there was a man named Jesus. That would be like me reporting on a group of people who believe that there's an alien spaceship following a comet. That doesn't affirm there's an alien spaceship following the comet, just that there's a group of people who think so.
The crucifixion of Jesus within 100 years. Now, 100 years is actually kind of strict, but it's a nice, narrow parameter for saying Jesus lived. If he died, he had to have lived.
Correct. If Jesus died, he lived. Or to put it the right way around, if Jesus lived, Jesus died. That doesn't get us anywhere close to verifying any of the supernatural stuff, miracles, resurrection, Son of God. All this work is still ahead of you, Dr. Habermas.
So Bart Ehrman calls that one of the two best evidences we have for that Jesus lived in history. The other one is that Paul is the best New Testament reference we have. Critics talk about half of Paul's epistles, 7 out of 13, being accredited, and you can use them in arguing because they're great sources.
He doesn't explain what accredited means. And since he's so vague, I can't even determine if that's an equivocation or not. In a traditional sense, accredited means verified and certified by other known experts, like when a university is accredited. Other universities look at that university and say, okay, you're doing a good job. You're up to the academic standards where we will grant you the authority to bestow degrees upon those who have earned them. Applying that, since Dr. Habermas doesn't feel inclined to supply a definition, should tell us that 6 out of the 13 epistles written by Paul are not even up to the minimum standard of Christian scholarship. Does that make Paul a good source?
He was an eyewitness to the eyewitnesses.
That's just fantastic. Many apologists like J. Warner Wallace like to bring out the idea of a criminal trial. You're building up a case, building evidence, and of course you want to bring in your eyewitnesses. It's well known in the criminal justice community that eyewitnesses are the least reliable kind of evidence there is. Because as former Detective Wallace himself might tell you, if 10 people witness a car accident, you're going to have 10 completely different stories of what happened in that car accident. It is the absolute bottom of the barrel when it comes to any kind of rigorous evidential standard. If you were to try to stage a criminal case and you could not find an eyewitness, you had nothing, no statements from an eyewitness, no written records from an actual eyewitness, all you could find was an eyewitness of an eyewitness. How much weight do you think that would actually carry?
Paul in Galatians 1 and again in Galatians 2, he went to Jerusalem and got to know Peter, James, the brother of Jesus, then in Galatians 2, John. They're all together, and the topic they're discussing, as Paul tells us, is the nature of the gospel, to make sure they're all on the same page.
Oh, cool. They're colluding to get their story straight. That gives me great confidence in the quality of the evidence.
But here, that's two great sets of data for the existence of Jesus. 15 independent sources.
15 different sources, but not independent sources. This is what I was talking about with equivocation. Just because they're separate books doesn't mean they're independent. In fact, we know several of the Gospels are dependent on each other. There's whole sections of Mark that just got lifted and copied into other books.
The crucifixion of Jesus, and Paul knowing himself, of course, Peter, James, and John, the big four.
Yes, Peter, James, and John. Not to be confused with those little-known nobodies, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
And he can ask whatever questions he wants to about what Jesus looked like when he was walking and talking in Galilee. So it would be like asking George Washington, or asking Thomas Jefferson, what was George like? Asking Adams and John Quincy Adams and Monroe and so on, what do you know about George? And then it'd be really cool if you could talk to Martha. And that's neat because we have the women's testimony for going to the tomb and so on.
This is not a great look, Dr. Habermas. We do not have the women's testimony. We don't even know which women and how many. We have someone's account of the verbal record of someone else's account of what the women supposedly said. We are 5 steps removed from the women's testimony.
And as Bart Ehrman says, he knows of nobody, no accredited specialist in the field of religion, no matter how liberal or how atheist or whatever, none of them.
Liberal equals atheist? I believe secular is the word you're looking for.
Who have university, college, or seminary positions, none of them teach that Jesus never lived. The guys who teach it and claim to be scholars are people who don't have accredited degrees. He said with 2 exceptions, is Bart's count. The rest do not have accredited degrees, and none of them have university positions.
What you believe about the documents left behind, they're not super impressive evidence. I don't actually care. If Jesus lived, Jesus died. Cool, great. Of course, in order to achieve any miracles at all, he had to have lived. But until you can demonstrate there were any miracles, it doesn't matter if he lived. So I suppose the game here is to convince you that this extremely low bar of very insufficient evidence for Jesus having lived, if you accept that for Jesus living, then you must also accept it for the much higher standard of evidence necessary to clear reasonable doubt for the miracles. So I think that's what's being played at here, is this trying to get you to accept the crappy evidence now on the low impact claim so that when the high impact claim comes up, you've already accepted the necessary bad evidence.
To me, that's the real test. It's not just Christians saying they're wrong. It's non-Christian scholars saying they don't have a chance.
Okay, that's the end of the first video. However, there's a second video.
So what is like your 5-minute spiel on the evidence in support of the resurrection? These are facts. These are historical facts And this is what you specialize in. So
there's the key. We need proof of a resurrection. If that happened, then we can take it for granted that Jesus was real. If it didn't happen, it doesn't matter if Jesus was real. So let's cut to the chase.
I start with what I call a minimal facts argument. It's a species of reliability, one of the reliability arguments, but where most reliability arguments are top-down arguments. If the book is reliable, it's like an umbrella. Everything under it gets kept, from the rain. If the book is generally true, whatever's reported under it is accurate. Mine's a bottom-up, and instead of an umbrella, I would suggest an example of a brick wall.
And this is an excellent tactic, considering we've shown 7 Ways to Sunday that the book is not reliable and not accurate. So he can just toss that whole thing out. It doesn't matter if the overall book is accurate. I'm building this case with my little bricks, and that could conceivably hold up even if that roof of the book's reliability is removed, which it has been.
And I've used anywhere from 3 to 7 over the years. Lately, I've been doing 6. And I would say Jesus died by crucifixion.
Fact 1, Jesus died by crucifixion. Assuming Jesus lived, Jesus died. How Jesus died doesn't really matter, so we'll count that as a given and move on.
His disciples had experiences that they believed were appearances of the risen Jesus.
Number 2, it has been claimed that his disciples had experiences that they believed were of the risen Jesus. That's technically a fact, but there's 2 different parenthetical qualifiers in there, so it doesn't actually demonstrate anything.
Because of their belief that he was raised, it is the event that has turned the world upside down religiously. In fact, a recent book on non-believing Jews and the resurrection, they even acknowledge, not being Christians, that Christianity is a resurrection religion. It was the
Fact 3, because they believed, Christianity happened. Okay, granted, because after all, if no one believed, the religion wouldn't have spread. Nobody would have been telling other people about it.
Of being willing to die.
And that is a very common but faulty claim. While several members of the early church were martyred, it's not clear whether it was because they were willing to die or they were simply killed.
4, very important, it was proclaimed very early. And today, critics, the consensus position is that you can track the resurrection preaching back to immediately after the cross.
So, fact 4. The myth got started early. Okay, early is kind of subjective, but we see in our own time myths getting going within a single year. Even people who were present at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th now believe something completely different than what factually happened and was recorded on camera. So a myth getting started early, even if that is true, which it is not a given, doesn't actually matter.
It's often stated by, say, Bart Ehrman, is that when Paul said yes to Jesus on the way to Damascus, there was already a body of data called the early creeds that are later written in the New Testament, but they were already being noised abroad.
Yes, people were already spreading the mythology of Christianity. As you may recall, Paul, formerly Saul, was a persecutor. His job was to track down Christians. If there were no Christians with things that they believed running around, he wouldn't have had a job chasing them down, would he? That, again, does not prove the resurrection. It proves people believed the mythology.
And then the last 2 would be individuals, James, the brother of Jesus, and Paul, both of whom become Christians because they believed they had experiences which were appearances of the risen Jesus. Those are the 6 I would use.
Okay, and the final fact is 2 other people converted. Out of these 6 minimal facts, they're all technically facts, but they have no evidentiary power at all. Just to put that into context, that's as if I said, I went to Disney World and I saw Mickey Mouse. Not an actor playing Mickey Mouse, the real cartoon Mickey Mouse. He's a real cartoon being living in the sewers of Disney World. And people said, well, I don't believe you then. But maybe I convinced a few people, and maybe they started running around and adding on to the myth, and we knew it was Mickey Mouse because he used his cartoon ink self to slip under the manhole covers. That's how we knew he was a cartoon. In fact, that's a miracle. So Mickey Mouse not only is a cartoon being, but has special powers that only a cartoon being could have. And then they start telling the story, and finally it becomes such a problem that people start trying to hunt down these cartoonists. Maybe they're Disney lawyers trying to stop the slander of Mickey Mouse. Who knows? And one of them somehow becomes convinced. He says, maybe it's true that Mickey actually is hiding in the sewers of Disney World, and maybe he does have real cartoon powers. And he becomes an apostle. He starts spreading the word of this divine cartoon Mickey Mouse existing in the real world and having these magical powers. Nobody saw this but me, and I probably made it up. So it doesn't matter how many people get convinced or how early the myth starts, we still have no reason at all to believe it's anything other than a myth. My case has basic facts, and by putting the word fact in there, it makes it sound more authoritative, doesn't it? It is a fact that I claimed to have seen a real cartoon Mickey Mouse in Disney World. It is a fact that other people believed my claim, evidence or not. It is a fact that other people came to persecute my group because of these claims, because of the slander against Mickey Mouse. It is a fact that some of them were Disney lawyers. Now, why would they bother if it were just an erroneous claim? Who's to say? But it's a fact they came after us, and that persecution, that adds credibility, doesn't it? It is a fact that according to the story, one of those persecutors converted. None of this verifies the claim of the mythology. It verifies that there are claims about the claims, and some people believed them.
So how did they respond to this? That you have these facts and you establish them historically, and you say the best explanation of these facts is that God raised Jesus from the dead, right? And there are these existing naturalistic attempts of explaining away these facts.
Yeah.
What is the best one to your knowledge, and then why do you think that it fails?
They will usually say something like this. Facts are good. I don't agree. It's your idea is the only way to go. But, you've got an evidence case. And if you pushed them a little bit and said, well, what keeps you from believing the stuff yourself? If the
Can I
evidence
guess?
is so good. Go ahead.
Hume.
Well, Hume, but I think generally they'll say, I just don't want to believe.
I just don't want to believe. How about your evidence is shit, Gary? They're facts in the very most tenuous sense of the word. By no means would I call them evidence, because they don't provide any support for the actual claim being made. People don't want to believe because they're not convinced. Belief isn't really a choice. Your facts are shit evidence and fail to convince anyone who doesn't already believe.
Really?
And they will say miracles don't happen, and that say that they know you're ready. They don't often want to take you on.
A lot of people may say that, but that is technically a black swan fallacy. I have never seen a miracle, therefore miracles never happen. However, even if I allow the possibility that miracles might happen, and I simply haven't personally experienced one, a miracle happening doesn't prove your claim. If I have a miracle happen, an imam would tell me that that's proof of Allah. A Hindu would tell me that's proof of Ganesh. How do we know that a miracle is proof of any particular God claim or any of them at all?
Another comment is, yeah, but you got a problem with your theory. What's that? Well, you got some data for your theory, and I'm not exactly sure where I would go to refute it. But you're asking me, implicit in your argument, is you're asking me to believe in Middle-earth, Narnia, or if you want a secular example, Oz. You're asking me to believe in that. And there's no world like that. How do you know? Well, there's no, look, everything we know from empirical science, there's not an ultimate universe. And when I'm talking to a person like that, I always go,
we don't know that there aren't alternate universes. That's an entirely separate discussion. But what's really key is this is sort of a red herring to get you onto the idea of cosmology and multiple dimensions and so on and so forth. What really matters is that we don't have a reason to believe this claim, this specific alternate reality where magic things happen, might be real. It's not that we can prove it doesn't exist, it's we have no reason to believe it does. And until we do, we're not going to believe it.
Time out. Let's talk about near-death experiences.
Oh, good, near-death experiences, where people tend to experience whatever the heck it is that they already believe. Hindus see one of the Hindu gods, Muslims see Allah, Mormons see Joseph Smith, and yes, some Christians see Jesus. I myself have had a near-death experience. It does not conform to any religion I've ever heard of. So until I hear someone else describe the same experience I had, I'm gonna stick with the idea that it's generated by the brain rather than being a real experience outside of yourself.
In a way, that's 20 million people who've been to Narnia, if you want to look at it that way. So don't tell me there's no empirical evidence for this.
That's not empirical evidence. That's testimonials. I wonder how many people claim to have experiences with aliens. Does that somehow prove Jesus? What does that have to do with anything?
Yeah, those are just experiences. You don't have data. Well, you don't say that to me. I just gave a paper yesterday. I know of 300 evidenced NDE accounts.
McCarthyism. I have here a list of names. Or even Paulism. There were 500 witnesses. The way Gary uses the word evidence, the equivocation, it's really, really shaky. So, to clarify what he's talking about here about evidenced experiences, what he means is someone wrote down on a piece of paper that they had an experience and then they signed it. Now there's evidence of the experience. It doesn't mean the experience actually happened. They could be lying, but there's evidence of it. So when we say evidence of an experience, we're talking about confirmation that the thing actually happened. For instance, you write a number on a piece of paper and put it on top of a soda machine in the operating room. Someone has an NDE and can see while they're floating above their body that piece of paper and read the number off of it. That test has been tried thousands of times, and it has succeeded exactly
0!
By the metric of actual testable, observable evidence, there are 0 evidenced NDEs ever recorded.
If you can't refute it, and it's almost impossible to refute the NDEs.
You write a number on a piece of paper and put it on top of a soda machine in the operating room. Someone has an NDE and can see while they're floating above their body that piece of paper and read the number off of it. That test has been tried thousands of times.
If you can't refute them and you have this alternate reality.
If you can't refute, what the hell kind of scientist are you? Okay, you're a Christian historian. Fine. But surely you're aware of the scientific method. That's not how that works. You don't present a heaping pile of made-up bullshit and say, if you can't disprove every single piece of crap in this pile, I win. It's not on us to refute it. It's on you to prove that it's valid.
In the category of afterlife, oh, so there may be an afterlife. Well, I didn't think so until today, but yeah, I guess maybe there is. Okay, now can we talk about resurrection?
Oh, cool. Okay, so you want to use the NDEs not to prove that there's miracles, but to prove there's an afterlife. But there's a problem with that. If there is in fact an afterlife that you ascend into via your soul or whatever, a resurrection is sort of the opposite of an afterlife. If there is an afterlife, and I'm not saying there is because the evidence he presented really, really is shit. But if there is an afterlife, it kind of rules out resurrection as that being what happens.
See, because I've opened the door to talk about this alternate reality, which may last forever, and you can't say anymore, yeah, but you're asking me to believe in Oz, because I would say, I sure am, and I've got data for Oz.
And that's it. A claim of data. Not good data, and none of it actually verifies the resurrection. Because besides the equivocations and the goalpost shifting and the red herrings, when you boil it all down, he has one claim, and he somehow managed to expand that out to pretend it's a field full of evidence. But none of it actually substantiates the claim. It's all derivative from the claim. And this dude has a doctorate. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you for subscribing. A big thank you to our supporters on Patreon and memberships here on the channel. And as always, remember, you don't have to pretend a bunch of made-up stories about other people's made-up stories somehow count as reliable evidence, because you are better than religion. My neighbors are making a ton of noise. This should be interesting. Now, the alternative that scholars like Dr. Habermas tend to